Hey, and welcome to your first principles lecture in this intro-level graphic design class. And we will begin today by asking the question, what is the purpose of graphic design? One of the most common answers I get to this question is, well, we use it to sell stuff, right? Not entirely. From an artist's perspective, the purpose of graphic design goes beyond selling products. It's about communicating ideas and emotions and narratives in a visually impactful way. It's a medium that bridges creativity and functionality. It allows the artist to shape how and people perceive and interact with a message. Graphic design transforms ideas into tangible visuals using typography, image, color, compositions to evoke emotions. You can tell stories with it. You can inspire action as well. So it's about creating a connection between the audience and the concept, whether that's awareness, sharing a vision, or encouraging a deeper understanding of the subject. For artists, graphic design is a powerful tool to amplify creative expression while serving a purpose, whether that's cultural, educational, social, or commercial. So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about crafting meaning and making ideas resonate. Let's take a look at some of the examples. I have linked a bunch of videos in this particular lesson, so if you would like to pause and watch some of the video linked underneath this graphic design link, it's from Studio Practice. It's a really fun video. Then you can pause this lecture and watch it now. So I hope that at least provokes a little bit of thought. Let's take a look at some good examples of graphic design before we start talking about visual rhetoric and how you can convey those ideas. So this is a poster by Thomas Perstocky, and it is about civil engagement. So We Need More Party Animals is a thought-provoking piece of graphic design created for AIGA, that's the International Alliance of Graphic Designers, as a vote initiative. So the campaign was aimed at increasing voter participation by using graphic design to inspire civic movement. So with this playful aesthetic, it features a bunch of different illustrations of animals depicted as a mix of party symbols, like the donkey and the elephant that we all know. It's a festive and celebratory twist on it, but this also encourages a sense of unity while emphasizing the importance of participation. The We Need More Party Animals is a double entendre. On one hand, it's a playful call to action, inviting people to the party of voting. On the other, it critiques apathy, suggesting that political engagement, regardless of party affiliation, should be more inclusive and spirited. All right, so next up we have I'm Moral. This piece by John Creason and Monica Schlag is about reframing the argument for reproductive choice. But at the same time, we have a nice visualization. It's obviously across a woman's back, and it is reframing the I'm moral into the word immoral. The simplicity of the design enhances the conceptual weight, leaving space for the audience to engage with these questions. You know, is morality relative, determined by the individual, or is that determined by a group of people? So this piece exemplifies how graphic design can go beyond mere aesthetics and provoke thought and dialogue, and also social commentary. All right, so if graphic design is about delivering messages, it really depends on what kind of message you're trying to convey. Let's take a look at what I would consider propaganda-like ads. This is First Call, US poster by James Montgomery Flagg in 1917. So we've been doing this a long time, people. Ever since people can print things, they can push what I would consider agendas, whether that be the agenda of an entire country or an individual. So in this case, we have Uncle Sam pointing at you, making you feel really bad about not enlisting. And here we have basically a political smear against the fellow who owns Amazon. Oh, Bezos. So make Amazon pay. So these are both very, very convincing and interesting messages. But I want you to think about design as not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just like any other art form. It depends on who's saying it and what they have to say. So this is communicating the importance of British Black history. This is a piece called The Black Outdoor Project by Johannes, I think that's how you say it, back in 2020. So these are all significant figures from Black history that he wanted to highlight in this street project. So this is an exhibit put together by the British Museum. If you would like to read more about this piece, download and all of the sources for each of the pieces in the slides is linked at the bottom. I wanted to show you some work by the designer Massimo Vignelli. You can visit his portfolio by clicking on that link in the bottom of the slide. I think a lot of designers obsess about developing their style, right? But I think you need to start developing taste first and learn the language of design before you decide what your style is. And here's a famous quote from Massimo Vignelli: "Styles come and go. Good design is a language, not a style." As you can see, he's got quite a diverse collection of work here in his portfolio. And you might attribute it to one designer, but you might also say that he's very adaptive to what it is his client needs. So thinking about what your client needs and trying to help them communicate with their key audience is what you want to do as a designer. It's actually a very compassionate field of work, you might say. Here we have yet another piece by Massimo Vignelli. And as you can see, it's quite a contrast from the one's previous very clean Swiss design work. And here we have this giant woodcut, but also with some really clean typography up here at the top. So there is some consistency there. Let's start talking about Gestalt principles. So Gestalt theory emphasizes how people perceive visual elements as unified wholes rather than separate components. And there are some pieces of that language that you can learn to implement in your own designs. Things like proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, figure ground relationships, symmetry, and common fate. And we're going to take a look at some of these principles as applied to design today. Let's start by talking about how your brain finishes a picture. So these two are optical illusions because obviously we don't have a triangle, we don't have a star, but your brain will complete that picture because of the proximity of these shapes and how we perceive figure ground relationships. So our brain is in there flipping the figure ground so we can see the shape that's on top of all of these circles. Continuing on, we also have, so your brain is finishing this picture. It's being influenced by whether or not you want to see a vase or whether or not you want to see faces in this optical illusion, right? So you can influence the way that people perceive information by your design choices, and that's the most important thing to learn about this little illustration. Here we have other lines influencing how we perceive the length of those lines. Because your perception of one being longer is controlled by the shape of the arrows, whether they point in or out. These oranges are exactly the same color. Your perception of them is influenced by what surrounds them. And I would encourage you, like if you're a painter, try out this exercise for yourself. Take two complements and mix up the same color, whether that be a gray or some other maybe a deeply saturated color, and surround it with those color opposites, and you will perceive those things to be either darker, lighter, cooler, warmer, depending on the context of those colors. This example was developed by a man named Joseph Albers, and he was really important when it comes to developing our ideas that we use about color theory now. So here is a really good example of proximity. We have repeated this graphic across two different lines here. The rings overlap with each other. The proximity of these circles reinforces their connection. And what are we saying about these rings? All of these different peoples coming together from all across the world to have a competition of the best athletes. And this has been going on for a really long time. Did you know that this logo was built in 1913? It's really old, actually. So here we have an example of similarity. We have three letters in a similar typeface with repeated similar lines, And this was designed by Paul Rand. He's a pretty famous designer, so if you want to look him up, there's some more of this brand at the link there, but you can also just look up Paul Rand. This works because the evenly spaced horizontal lines create a uniform look across the logo. It remains consistent throughout their graphics, and it repeats a lot as a pattern elsewhere. Next up, we have Russian constructivist work. This is Beat the Whites Down with the Red Wedge in 1919. So why this design works is the repetition of those triangles. Those triangles are at war with those pure forms, those circular shapes. So they're trying to evoke a revolution. I know that it looks like just simple shapes, but we're having a war here. And those angular forms are in contrast to all of those circular forms. And that's the difference that they perceived in their ideas. So we're trying to communicate one idea against another idea. In this case, the very conservative against the more liberal aspects of communism. Here is a great example of what we call common fate in typography and graphic design. This is by Paul Bass. He's also a very famous designer, so if you've never heard of him, you might think about The Anatomy of Murder, the Psycho titles like we're looking at here, and lots of other designs in the 1960s. This particular one is for the very famous horror film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. And all of these pieces are unified by the fact that they're being sliced up by these lines. It's a bit gruesome to think about. I would encourage you to pause the lecture and go and watch the video on art of the title, which is a really great platform for finding kinetic typography if you're interested in that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about simplicity. This is the subway map designed by Massimo Vignelli in 1972, and it is a different version of this particular map by, I'm not really sure how to say that last name. This map was redesigned in 2017. As you can see, as we move further into the future, we've got more of a minimalist look. And this conveys the subway systems here in Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. Each little line represents a particular train and all of the stops along that subway train. So really effective use of color and composition in terms of communicating an idea. It's clear where you can go from what train. And that's what makes this map graphic so good. But let's take a step away from minimalism and talk about rhythm, repetition, and pattern. And there's no one that knows it more than William Morris. William Morris was an 18th and 19th century designer, and he did so many things, but what he was really good at creating was very intricate patterns. So he created patterns that repeat organic shapes, motifs, creating harmonious and timeless design. This is for a particular book. This is one of his wallpaper designs, and I really like this one because it's called The Strawberry Thief. You know, clearly we have some really hungry birds here. The repetition of that red shape, and also how the floral designs mirror themselves, and so do the bird forms. It creates an interwoven, intricate pattern that is pleasing to look at. It's one of the reasons that our brains enjoy repetition and pattern, is because we see it so much in nature. I would encourage you to visit that link and read more about William Morris, especially if you are interested in illustration and surface pattern design. Here we have a very overwhelming and confusing of continuation and closure. This is by M.C. Escher, and M.C. Escher was a mathematician and also an artist, which makes his work really surreal, honestly. This is a surrealist architecture piece, and it's been recreated many, many times. I'm sure that you've seen it before. It's called Relativity. And everyone is walking on different trajectories up and down these stairs. And depending on how you look at certain pieces of the perspective of this, it twists and bends throughout the composition. The thing that gives it an anchor is all of these areas of closure, like the little open space right here where we see a person. It looks like they're having a little bit of lunch, I think. I'm not really sure. By the way, if you're a fan of playing games, there is a game based on this piece by Escher. And this is another good continuation and closure piece based on that. This is a aesthetic for the game Monument Valley, where you have to navigate these crazy landscapes and move about in perspective, and it is beautiful. I've linked the preview to the game if you would like to go and watch that and see some beautiful cinematic. Okay, so this is a play on past experience. This is Art Deco posters of the 1920s and 30s by A. Cassandra. He's very famous for creating that travel poster aesthetic. We've got some really nice airbrushing going on, some really clean typography. And what are we meant to perceive about this particular ship? Well, the streamlined aesthetic of the poster resonates with the viewer's associations with technological progress and opulence. So we are clearly located down, looking up at this beautiful, luxurious, opulent boat that we're meant to be maybe a little bit envious of. Art Deco was all about glamour and showing off how wealthy you were. So if this is a aesthetic that you are interested in, maybe take a look at some A. Cassandra poster. So I couldn't let you get away without looking at just a couple more Cassandra posters just for fun. Here's a very luxurious set of cigarettes. Like, the perspective on this one is insane. It looks a whole lot like the crazy perspective in some phone commercials, in my opinion. Also, we have some lipstick with a really stylized mirror for Harper's Bazaar by A.M. Cassandra. So again, if this aesthetic resonates with you, this is a good place to start in terms of 1920s design. All right, so symbiotics is a concept that a lot of people struggle with in terms of understanding design. And one of my favorite examples of this is by Magritte, who was a surrealist artist in the 1920s. And I know you probably don't read French, but this is not a pipe, is what that says. So the definition of symbiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their meaning. And what we're talking about here is called the treachery of images. And so if you look up the treachery of images, you will probably find more of Magritte's work. And what he's saying about this pipe is this isn't a pipe, it's a symbolic picture of a pipe that I've painted. It's very meta, if you will. So designers use symbols, colors, and imagery to resonate with cultural and contextual significance to create meaning. And that's a really heady way to say we use symbology to communicate with other people. Things that you readily understand, that you can look at and immediately understand, that's a symbol. Letter forms are one of the most common symbols, but you can also find symbols in imagery. Like this one, it's not a pipe, it's a symbol of a pipe. So more on symbiotics, let's use symbiotics to break apart the narrative of this image. This is The Problem We All Live With in 1963 by Norman Rockwell. Now, Norman Rockwell is normally known for all of his idealistic and Americana-style images that are fun and funny, and most of the time very unserious and silly. This is a large change of tone for him, depicting the first African-American to ever attend a previously all-white school. And yet she had to be walked there by two marshals. But what is this image telling us about the situation? Like, we've got a very innocent, sweet little girl walking determinedly. I will say her posture is really determined, by a bunch of marshals just to guide her from those horrible people throwing things on the street. So we have overlapping historical context, we have facing adversity, and we're tapping into those really deep symbols of both innocence, perseverance, and also the powers that be determining the fate of someone who was completely undeserving of so much hate. I love the sense of purpose and determination of this image, and I've included an excerpt from the original article that accompanied this, and if you would like to read a little bit more about it, I also linked it in the description of this slide. Moving on, we've also got Barbara Kruger's text artworks, Your Body is a Battleground. Okay, so what's interesting about this image to me is how very 1950s housewife the lady is in the background. And we've also got a positive negative shift, right, dividing the composition here in the middle. So we've got bold text juxtaposed with stark imagery to communicate a feminist message. And it's definitely a social critique. So the choice of words, color, and typeface conveys the urgency and sense of activism in this piece. More about aesthetics, we have Hakusai the Great Wave of Kanagawa, which is a really interesting place to start as far as printmaking goes. This is a Japanese woodblock print that most people know. This man was completely obsessed, by the way, with Mount Fuji, which this isn't a wave back here. This is actually Mount Fuji. And you might say that he was the first person to create a graphic novel since he did a whole collection of these prints. But what makes this work so well is the contrasting colors, the sense of movement, creating majesty for that wave, and the aesthetic beauty is in the harmony and the visual drama of this piece. We have some poor fishermen that are at mercy with this enormous tidal wave and set in a very peaceful setting in front of a mountain. I mean, go figure. I really enjoyed the stylized water, like the curly Asian water in a lot of Japanese prints is pretty amazing. Continuing on with aesthetics, this is a Bauhaus poster from 1923, very, very different, but really not too far, just like a few years after this was made, which really blows my mind, by Jos Schmidt. Here's why that one in particular works. Bauhaus design was really about integrating clean forms. So what they considered pure forms were just pure pieces of geometry, like circles and squares and straight lines. Here we've got our composition divided up in half by a diagonal line. And we've got all of our typography lined up with these big fields of color. So the Bauhaus principles, form follows function, and a visually dynamic and balanced composition is key. And they often did that with pure forms and typography. Color maps. This is okay, I told you we would circle back to Johannes Itten. Here he is. This is one of his beautiful color wheels and fun quotation about color by him. The kingdom of colors has within it multidimensional possibilities, only partly to be reduced to simple order. Each individual color is a universe in of itself. You can actually read almost this entire book at the link in this particular slide, and you can also find a lot of his color books that have been translated to English online. I do believe that his original book is so old that it has been out of print for a while. Color theory. So Johannes Itten, Elements of Colors, very important book. He developed much of the thought that we now use. He was a Swiss artist and teacher at the Bauhaus School. So remember, the Bauhaus School, these people. And he developed a lot of ideas about the key elements of color. The complementary colors, analogous colors, warm, cool colors. Most of those ideas came from his book. He also created 7 colors, identified them as light, dark, cold, warm, complementary, saturation, and extension. And these are all different color maps from his book. One of the things to remember about his thoughts on color is he often categorized them into primary, secondary, and tertiary. But he also developed analogous colors and warm, cool colors. So this is Walewski Kandinsky. We talk a lot about the people in art, but we hardly ever see them as humans. And so I wanted to include a little picture of him and his cat. He was really a painter, very romantic about his ideas about color, and an interesting person to study and read about, I will tell you. He made this whole graph of color and emotion, and he believed that specific colors could elicit certain emotional responses. He linked colors also to musical notes, so he may have very well had that neurodiverse key in his brain that some people do when they listen to music and see certain colors. So he saw red as stimulating. That idea persists. You know, the more that we have studied red, we actually see that it increases your pulse, so it makes you excited or passionate. Blue is seen as a calm and spiritual color in his frame of thinking, and yellow is energetic and also creates tension. Let's take a look at a couple of film shots that use these colors in a pretty similar way to the way that Walewski thought about them. Red as a passionate, emotional color. Here we have 2001 Space Odyssey and Ex Machina. And, oh, by the way, linked in the bottom of this little slide here is Walewski's color and form exercise. So if you would like to go and give it a try, it's a really fun exercise to do. So these are very passionate responses in both of these slides for pretty different reasons, if you've seen either of these films. blue as a calm and spiritual color. This is from the topmost picture. It's from a film called Moonlight, and it is about the coming of age of an African-American gay man. And the bottom is from the Grand Budapest. It's a slight pause in action in the middle of a chase scene where he's entering a museum. Both really interesting uses of the color blue, and I think very much has that deep spiritual connection Walitsky was talking about. Here are two uses of the color yellow in two very different films. So up here at the top we have Midsummer, and here at the bottom we have Amelie. So you could say that these are energetic for two different reasons. The topmost one is probably using it more for the tension, because we're getting ready to, I mean, I don't really want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, but ritual sacrifice is what we're preparing for up here at the top. And at the bottom, we're just having a really fun and exciting motorcycle ride with our sweetheart. So both very emotional, both very dynamic and energetic, and very different uses for the color yellow. Okay, let's summarize what we've learned a little bit about the Bauhaus and color theory. So this is Kandinsky's several circles, and I think it's a really good place to stop as we're talking about color theory. So the Bauhaus was a German school, emphasized integration, art, design, and technology. Color in Bauhaus artists was developed by Johannes Itten and Walitsky Kandinsky, and they both developed different color theories that explored the emotional and symbolic context of color. So that wraps up our very first lecture. I hope you learned something new, and hopefully some different aspects about design language and color, and maybe a few new artists to look up. This is just a reminder that you can download this presentation if you would like to. It's linked in the Canvas shell with lots of fun links for inside of the PDF for you to click on and further explore. I do ask you to please do not place my presentation somewhere else for someone to download. Like, this is for you and for this class, and to keep as a record for this class. But it is my writing, and so I would appreciate it if you wouldn't do that. Anyway, this has been wonderful getting to talk about one of the things I'm super passionate about, and hope that you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.